I don't know whether you got to meet Dr. Langford or not. Did he introduce himself already?
He didn't do. Go ahead and introduce him, and then when we go around, I'll just...
No, I just, the one thing that when I met Dr. Langford was the difference he was making in West Virginia manufacturing. This was something that was innovative. We're well known in West Virginia for producing coal and gas and oil, but what he's taken us into a different area and with manufacturing, and I think it's part of this high-tech corridor that he's involved in bringing a very sophisticated manufacturing. To look at the aircraft that he's making, the Global Hawk, that is used to defend our troops all over the world, and it's made in West Virginia. The portions of it. So I think that he offers something that's particularly unique, and I was delighted that he had the opportunity to be here to show cutting edge and the new science of manufacturing, the use of carbon reinforced materials that we can use in our aircraft and use in surveillance and others. He's making helicopter parts, sections. His company, Aurora Flight Sciences, is I think a manifestation of where we can be as a nation if we can just focus some of our resources in the right area and make sure we support that and not ship it offshore. And I see what's happened, because let me just close with this, Brett. We've been through his plant several times, but every time is particularly unique. Each time is to go to a former coal miner working. They were able to take him up and train him, where so many people look down their nose at the coal mine industry, but to take someone and train him to be able to make some of the most sophisticated aircraft that we have in America today, and it's made from a former coal miner. All I did was some training to be able to do that. I'm very proud of it, and I'm glad that he could join us here today and give us some insight from their perspective of what it's going to take to continue that manufacturing rebuild of that. Thank you. When your earlier remarks, you gave me the impression that you had some knowledge of the aluminum industry.
Yes.
And knowing how dependent, well, I don't want to set the stage right on. So with that experience and all this issue of here in Congress about dealing with increasing the cost of electricity, because we've been told, many people have said on the floor that our utility costs are nowhere near what they are in Europe, and therefore we shouldn't have a problem getting our utility bills higher, because if Europe can do that, why can't we be paying higher? What effect would that have on the aluminum industry that requires such a great surge of power to those anodes to turn that into liquid aluminum? So could you share a little bit about the effect of higher utility bills on the manufacturing industry?
Yes, sir. Our industry, and as I said earlier, we've got a bit of a perfect storm brewing in our area. We have 2 smelters in the state of Kentucky, one in Hancock County in our area. These smelters use 400 megawatts of power a year. About 30% of the cost of operating a smelter is electrical power. My part of the business, the rolling business, we had 28 melters with capacities of 75 to 100,000 pounds of molten aluminum that we fueled with natural gas to melt the scrap. But in the smelter industry, where you have a process that reduces the aluminum, the pure aluminum, out of alumina powder, and that process is triggered by tremendous voltages of electricity into a salt bath that separates the aluminum. At 30% of your operating cost, any increase is significant to that business. The price of aluminum, it's a commodity price. It has varied from as low as 90 cents a couple of weeks ago to a high of $1.26 a pound in April of 2011. And so the margins for the aluminum industry and in the smelting business are very minimal to begin with. But when you look at that level of cost for power, any increase could have a very devastating effect on the future of that smelter.
So how would you help us argue that case? That because so many people on the other side of the aisle, unfortunately, are saying it's okay to increase the price of it. How can we do a better job? Because we're losing that fight, it seems.
Right. Well, first of all, if you look basically, the average wage in an aluminum primary smelter today is about $62,000 annual. You take a benefit package of about $35,000. These are high-paying jobs.
High school graduates, right?
High school graduates, in many cases. So when you talk about, as Congressman Guthrie said earlier, about the standard of living, 50% of the graduates of Hancock County High School don't go to college. That's our workforce. And when you look at that kind of wage and you look at the impact, these two smelters on their two counties generate, about $13 million a year in just property taxes, school taxes, occupational taxes. So to make the case that it's okay to just let the utility rates go up, what do we do with the 700 employees when those smelters shut down? And I'm talking 700 employees that are making these kind of wages in our communities. The impact. In the state of Kentucky, there's about 13,000 aluminum jobs right now. Those 13,000 jobs are paying anywhere from $80 to $90 million in state and local taxes. We believe it's a signature industry in Kentucky. The economic impact of aluminum ranks right up there with bourbon and thoroughbred horses and coal. So it is a critical industry to the fabric of the economy of the state of Kentucky. And other areas too. In Indiana, Warwick County is another smelter. So within, 50-mile radius, 3 of the 7 smelters operating in this country are right there. We've also got a power situation where these 2 smelters occupy over 60% of the load of that utility. That utility serves 122,000 customers, 2 of which are smelters, and those 2 smelters, take over 60% of their load. If you raise the utility rates on these 2 smelters and they go dark, that cost is going to be spread over those little white houses all around southern India or western Kentucky. So the picture of losing another smelter on top of the 12 we've lost in the last 10 years does not bode well for our area or for the country. And
Marshall wants to ask you a question.
sure.
No, not on that. I'm sorry. I thought you were finishing on that. I had a question on something else.
But does that help? I don't know. We know what's being done in some other states. Some states have put funds out there to offset the electrical increases. Some have passed legislation that exempted the aluminum smelters from increases through their public service commissions. So there's a number of things that some states are doing. West Virginia, for one, and with the Ravenswood smelter.
Ravenswood, Ormet, along the river. But this week we have some legislation coming up that's going to affect a utility MAC. That's going to be, but I don't know whether the American public yet is aware of the impact of some of these regulations are going to cause increasing the price of electricity and what it's going to do to our manufacturing. So I'm very alarmed about it because we're not getting the message out. So we need people like you and the manufacturer they've got to help us make sure our people are aware that increased cost is going to drive our businesses away from America, and again, past that cost is going to go on to the consumer. But I've got to find a way to argue the case where they say, but if the utility costs are okay in Europe, they should be okay in America.
Congressman, if
That's
I could
not-
just add one point to that. Yeah, so that's a very specific example, and there are thousands of those examples all over the country. But if you take more 30,000-foot look at it, and I think it's the issue that you're talking about, Utility Act is a great example of driving up the cost of doing business in this country, adding to that 20% cost differential. And there's a very specific reason for that. Manufacturers are the largest consumers of energy in the country. Manufacturers consume 30%, a third of this nation's energy output. It is usually, if it's not labor costs, energy costs are going to be the number one cost for any business to undertake in this country. So it is a matter of, if you're driving up the cost of energy, you, yes, could be losing jobs to other countries, but in the supply chain where you have smaller manufacturers, they don't have the ability to go anywhere else. They just fold and they go out of business. And those small companies could have been in business for decades, and we lose it because, again, of our own policies. So when the President talks about an all-of-the-above approach, he's exactly right. We need to develop and we need to encourage the development of all types of energy, not the least of which, of course, is the coal industry, which is one of the most economic means for producing energy in this country, ensuring that we have the ability to develop the shale fields that are being discovered all over this country, and taking advantage of every single type of energy there is, and helping to provide certainty. So we're talking now about the production tax credit for wind power in this country, and there may be debates about whether it's important or appropriate to prioritize one form of energy over another. It's appropriate to develop all types of energy in this country because manufacturers depend on it.
So would having a national energy policy help manufacturing?
Absolutely. And this country has struggled for decades to develop a coherent energy policy or any energy policy at all. It was a hot topic of conversation in the last administration. The last administration didn't develop one. This administration hasn't developed one. I believe it needs to come from the executive branch, and Congress needs to embrace it. But in the absence of one from the executive branch, then Congress should probably develop one itself. And if some of those facts that I just mentioned, the 30% number, are contained in this document, A Manufacturing Renaissance, 4 Goals for Economic Growth. And I've had a lot of questions from members of Congress about what are some of these data points that go into a successful manufacturing economy. And if you don't want to read the whole document, this little tear-out page right here will give you all the facts, point by point.
Kind of made for your pocket. Sam, you had something? We'll get to.
Yeah, just one other argument you might have there is that America, one of our advantages through the many, many years as a country has been our resources. Our natural resources are much less than many, many other countries, including and especially China. They've had to go all over the world to find minerals and other types of aluminum and stuff just to continue to compete with us. They may have cheap labor, but we have lower cost resources. If you raise the energy it costs to produce those, we'll lose one of our few advantages over China.